So I'm going to add some footnotes here. When we're in an enthusiastic or playful or skillful group of other humans, or when we see other humans doing this, and of course all of our films and shows, are about this. But in a small group of 5 or 7 people, maybe even 3 people, astonishing synergies occur, and they're astonishing enough that we should wonder if the 3 people that are there are actually individuals, and are they the individuals that they are when they're not in that group? We're sort of trained to think, of course they're the same people. That's still called Susan and Annika and Jane, or whoever they're called, right? So, they have the little ID cards that try to create the the illusion of a specific, explicitly static, explicitly distinct person. And so you can see how the representation excludes not merely ambiguity, which tends to be important for human utilization of things, and certain kinds of comfort, but it's blatantly obvious that not only are they not the same person when they're together, because all kinds of new features of their awareness and consciousness and introspection and emotion and all of these things arise and flourish in little beautiful storms that often include laughter or anger or, silliness. And it's just so obvious that our species we experience a terrible and unnecessary isolation from something essential to our nature, which isn't to say there aren't people who prosper in relative or very even extreme isolation. Of course there are. The people are a topology, not one way or 3. We can find almost anything we can imagine to go looking for in the human population of Earth. But everything we find is changing, and it's changing together in a way that we're just not equipped ordinarily to see. These minds we think of as distinct arose in dire proximity to other minds. And when they come back together in a group for any reason at all, but especially for noble reasons, unimaginable transformations of identity and role and potential occur. And these occurrences transform history and the future. Their temporality is not of the same form as the linear stuff we play around with. Even when I am making these recordings, I'm playing a game as if you are here with me, and we're trying to see together for each other in new ways and into new frontiers of, understanding or awareness. And so I am not myself. When I finish the recording and walk home and open the door and enter the house, the difference in the quality of my consciousness and awareness is so profound that it might be useful to call me a different thing, right? We should have a word for something like the me I am alone, the me I am when I'm alone, and the different kinds of beings I become with others. And with different others, I become different every time, right? We navigate together through, not merely through the world, but through awareness and consciousness and formulations in consciousness. And if we're lucky, applications of insight, yes? The discovery and exploration of insight together. And this is fundamentally what it has always been to be human. And I am not the same thing alone. I was thinking the other night about reading, and while I agree that the activity of reading a thing on a screen is a very similar activity to the behavior I engage with books, a screen is not a book. And my relationship with the screen is not similar at all to my relationship with a physical object. In fact, the forms of light are fundamentally different. Maybe we should call these different things. And even if we don't, we should realize they're dissimilar enough that it might benefit us to suppose that they don't even belong to the same class of behaviors. Much of our human suffering comes just fundamentally from loneliness. And the desire for meaningful roles and relationships and adventures. So I think our minds are always together. I think the people who are dreaming on this block in the night, they're certainly influencing each other's dreaming experience. And I think what they do in their houses influences each other's experience in their houses. There's an incredible synchrony of form and structure in this little neighborhood that the humans draft on and influence together. And of course it's a fairly strange thing because much of the purpose is almost specifically to get rid of ambiguity, to regularize experience so that we don't have to wake up our vigilant sentinels and so forth. So I'm trying to say there's something miraculous going on. And I heard Annika talking with Lex. I was just re-listening to part of the podcast. And they had some fascinating, insights and questions. But Lex used the word miraculous, and I wanted to interject and say, what does that mean? And one of the things it means is simply unexpected. But there are other things it means. And we can imagine that it has like some supernatural connotation or whatever, if we want to. I think there's lots better ways we can think. But the miracle is precisely the realization of something outside our frameworks, outside our expectations, outside the ordinary, an anomaly, if you will. But one of the features of these anomalies is that they tend to introduce dimensions of experience, sensing, role, and many other features that we can dimensionalize and sort of fold together into the event, whatever that, miracle may be. And most of us have experienced things that are incredibly unlikely, but we can imagine And we are trained to imagine that if we had a grasp on enough of the variables, we would see the explanation, and everything would be properly accounted for, and the event would be rendered non-miraculous. This is like getting the skeletal remains of an experience, that mode. And it's very useful for certain kinds of thinking, and maybe for insight as well. But it should stay in the scope it originates from, and not expand out there to encompass all other scopes, and thus become the metric by which they are measured. So the miraculous is really the introduction of previously missing or unexpressed dimensionality. And by that I don't just mean like sensing or emotion. I mean imagine we had a list of orientation, sensing, emotion, and thought. And then we added something that we don't even have a concept for. This is what I mean by the addition of a dimension. But these dimensions that become emergent in the miraculous phenomena, and I'll presume that there are some phenomena that are fundamentally inexplicable. In fact, it's not a very difficult thing to presume. All phenomena are fundamentally inexplicable. What we have are some very crude little, cobbled together models and words and things. And the collections that we have are missing most of the important parts, too. So one of the things that happens in a miracle is the important parts come back into the picture. And there's often a sense that I'll use the word transcendental to point at, where it's really as if for a moment the nature of time and space has warped or changed or become suddenly included things that have never been localized but might have been present, in a fragrance in the distributed experience of organisms on Earth, or humans, or a particular group of them. So the miraculous is precisely that which violates our expectations of things going along as they usually do. And events and phenomenon fitting in the catalog that we have of them. Not just verbally, though that too, but conceptually. And the problem with our concepts is when they're not nuanced enough, they become blinding, right? So the miracle is somehow illuminating our trenchant, ordinary, everyday blindness and introducing, new dimensionality. But that changes what we are. Once again, it's just like being with other minds. I'm sure there are people, and sometimes I might be one of them, who in the face of an actual miracle simply fail to recognize it, right? There's some kinds of blindness that are trenchant enough that, especially if the miracle is very brief, and or if the people who are experiencing it are surprised, or maybe even shocked, right? Then they'll spend a good portion of the event, in this form of consciousness. It's funny, there was a miracle that happened for me where, the story is incredibly important to me, but I had some pet fish, and when they were little, they jumped out of the tank one night. And I was gone for a long time. And by the time I came home, both of them were dead. I mean, they were dried out, you know. And as a child would, well, I wasn't a child at the time, I was a young teenager, I became very upset and put them back in the tank, and cried, and felt terribly irresponsible for not having protected them. And I was completely overwrought for many hours. I went wandering around the neighborhood I'm in now, crying and having all kinds of deep emotions about the situation. And I went home and went back to bed. And in the morning, the fish had come back to life and looked just as vital as they had the last time I'd seen them alive. And I always thought of it as miraculous. You know, I was praying about the fish. I was pleading with the universe, right, to bring my fish back to life and not punish them and so on. So, as far as I was concerned, my prayers were answered. And there was an actual miracle. Some, perhaps 25 years later, I learned that certain species of fish from Africa, particularly various species of cichlids, I think they're called, have developed over time the evolutionary capacity, because the places in which they live often dry up somewhat briefly. And these fishes have developed the capacity to desiccate and yet somehow remain alive in a kind of slightly suspended animation until the water returns. And for my rational mind, that's a sufficient explanation of everything that happened, and nothing else need be added. But I was there, participating in those experiences. And that can't be meaningfully subtracted unless, we have a good reason to do so, and we proceed in a more or less clinical, more or less para-rational fashion. Surely some of the miracles are explicable, but vast myriads of them are not. And even our explanations have such narrow purchase on phenomena in its actual astonishing beauty and complexity, to pretend to anything resembling the sort of authority that they seem to hold for a certain aspect or habitual the games we play in thought, conception, and particularly in language. Most of us dream. And the range of those experiences is infinite. And yet in our dreaming experience, in much of it, and there are phases of dreaming and they differ from each other, and it's a much more complex topic than just the idea that someone falls asleep and has a dream. But there's a peculiar anathema to language, and certainly to many forms of waking world conceptualization, that is completely natural to dreaming. And though we believe that we have conversations and such in dreams, and I think something is going on that very closely resembles a conversation, but it doesn't involve making sounds with our throats, right? And our mouths and our breath and so on. And if it starts to, the dream tends to warp dramatically or even collapse. And so it's important to see that there's native to our minds are these entirely other faculties that treat the dimensionality of situation, identity, world, universe, in a very astonishing array of ways. So we have experience, at least in dreaming, if we are dreaming, if that's going on for us, and there's some degree of not just inchoate miasma, right? There's some kind of structured experience in there. Then we can see that our minds have these other wings. And they begin to wake up when we're together. But the fact that we have minds at all is fundamentally miraculous. And it's very similarly miraculous how incredibly constrained our usual consciousness and awareness is. How lonely and sort of bleak. And of course, maybe I'm projecting a bit here, There's a radical transformation of my consciousness that happens when I'm making a recording like this, or having a conversation, or writing, or making music, or, deeply engaged with others. It's almost as if the possibility of others is enough to draw me out of my mundane, what do I do with my hands for the next 20 minutes? Is there some food to eat? Should I clean something or organize something, or, the sort of day-to-day minutiae of our lives. And the fascinating thing about the dreaming mind's modes of consciousness is that they're deeply participated. There's an incredible intimacy to the experience of dreaming that I think many of us would love to have return to our waking world experience. And we seek those opportunities in love and adventure and art and play and learning and teaching and, mutual rescue, all these things. We're seeking something more, right? We want... It's an invitation to the miraculous within us. Those are my notes for now. Thank you for bearing with me. I look forward to learning again, together, soon.